Good evening. My name is Teresa Gage from the Office of Alumni and Alumni Relations here at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. I welcome you to our program this evening, Making Space for Native American Art. Before we get started, just a few tips with housekeeping. Let's go ahead and keep our microphones muted just to limit our background noise, and feel free throughout the program to use the chat feature. We'd like to try to answer every question tonight, and if not, we'll also do our best to make sure we follow up and get those questions answered for you. So we're delighted to bring this amazing event to you and to gather our panelists together who are all connected in some way. We're here to discuss K-Art, the first and only Native-owned art gallery of its kind in the United States. This groundbreaking commercial art gallery will solely showcase the artwork of national-level Native contemporary artists. The gallery's inaugural exhibition, which opened in early December, is housed within K-House, a design, art, and tech-centric space in downtown Buffalo, New York. Today, we have with us Brooke Leboeuf, William Smith Class of 2001, K-Art's art director, and we'll hear about her path in the world of art and how it began here at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. Dave Kimelberg, owner and founder of K-Art, and contemporary artist Peter Jemison, who will be presented with the college's highest honor, a Doctor of Humane Letters. Moderating our program this evening is Assistant Professor of Art and Architecture at HWS, Angelique Szymanek. And in speaking of connections, we've asked Angelique here tonight, as she and Brooke were classmates in the Masters of Art History program at the University of Buffalo. It is with great pleasure that I turn the program over to our panelists, and let's get started. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Teresa, for the introduction and for all of your hard work to make this happen. I have to commend you and acknowledge you while everyone is listening for all of your organizational skills and your positive attitude. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about how many people have come out. It's nice when weather is not a factor in attendance to events in this region. So thank you all for being here. I want to start by acknowledging that although we're meeting virtually, many of us, if not all, are currently occupying land that has traditionally belonged to Indigenous peoples. Teresa and I are in Canada-Sauga in Geneva, New York, on traditional Seneca territory. Brooke, David, and Peter are also joining us from Seneca lands, which expand over 21,618 acres, located along the Cattaraugus Creek from Gowanda, New York, downstream to the shore of Lake Erie, encompassing parts of Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, and Erie counties, so quite expansive. Most of us are probably on Seneca lands. So I want to begin by asking our panelists tonight if they would introduce themselves. So if each of you would please tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you all to the working relationship that you have to make K-Art happen. Maybe Brooke, want to start?
Sure. My name is Brooke Leboeuf, and I work as the director, art director at K-Art. And I came to this project. It's a very typical Buffalo story. A neighbor of mine who knew Dave and knew about his project also knew about my background, and we connected that way. I was thrilled to hear that he was interested in opening more contemporary art space in Buffalo. And also when I learned about the concentration and this focus that he wanted to have, I was thrilled because after looking around, there really wasn't anything like this, and it was a really innovative idea. So I was thrilled to jump on board and start delving into what contemporary artists were around regionally and nationally, and what we could do.
Great.
Dave, you want to go next?
Sure. It's the awkward pause. My name's Dave Kimelberg. I'm the founder of K-Art, and I'm also a member of the Seneca Nation. And I started the idea of K-Art probably about a year and a half alongside some other projects that it's part of, development in downtown Buffalo. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Brooke. Like Brooke said, it's sort of a classic Buffalo story, friend of a friend. But it worked out. It's worked out very well. And of course, Peter, I was very fortunate to be introduced to him and have him as part of our inaugural exhibition, and I'm sure more to come.
So Nyawaskanok Gogwego, Onundawak Ni A. In my language, I give thanks that all of you are well. We who are Seneca actually are referred to as the people of the Great Hill. And Onundawak is the word we use, and the language is Onundawak Gweno, the language of the people of the Great Hill. I am a contemporary artist, and I have been working for many, many years. My original schooling was in Buffalo at Buffalo State College. I taught for a year there at a place called Lafayette High School, and did a little bit of ironworking around Buffalo too. So I've got quite roots in Buffalo. But currently I run a place called Ganondagan in Victor, New York, and it's the site of a 17th century Seneca town. And I've been here for many years, and it's been a very enjoyable time for me and for my wife and my children. It's been a great learning experience working at Ganondagan.
All right, well, thank you all very much. The next question that I have for you all is a two-parter. So the first thing that I think we'd all like to hear more about is some of the details about what it took to make K Art Gallery happen. So if you want to share a little bit about what that process looked like, how you got the space off the ground. I'm a Buffalo native, so I happen to know that Buffalo is the best city for art in the region, arguably in the state, arguably in the nation. So it makes sense to me why it's there, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about how it fits in the broader art community in Buffalo. And then I have a kind of the second part to that has to do with naming practices. So I'm assuming that not everyone here joining us tonight has the same understanding of the distinction between the term Indigenous American and Native American. And so your gallery is dedicated to Native American contemporary arts. So I wonder if you could just sort of clarify for all of us folks joining tonight, the kind of choice, the distinction between those two identifiers.
Sure, I can take the first question. So in terms of how, we started, I at least had the idea of, hey, it would be great to start a commercial art gallery with a focus on Native American contemporary artists, because I didn't see that sort of in the general marketplace at all. And Buffalo is where I live, and my family lives, and the Seneca Nation is very close by that I have obviously a strong connection to. And we found a building downtown, and it was perfectly suited. The first floor is, I think, ideal for an art gallery, hopefully when COVID stops and we can open it up to everyone sort of on a general basis. I encourage everyone to come visit us. But it just worked perfectly, and it's right in Allentown, which is sort of the center of the arts district for Buffalo. So it's perfect.
Yeah,
but I'll let Brooke add on to that, because she's done all the hard work in terms of the art.
I got to do the fun part. I had worked out of grad school as a curator for a small gallery space Buffalo art studio, and then went on to work at the Albright Knox. So I spent a lot of time getting kind of the lay of the land at Buffalo, from their really small, more grassroots art spaces to the big names, the Albright and the Birchfield Penny. So when Dave came up with this idea, it felt like it really, there was really a space for it. I feel we have so many, we have some fantastic commercial galleries, nonprofit galleries, the bigger nonprofits, and it just seemed like Dave's idea would fit beautifully into this already really, really amazing scene that we have.
Thanks. So Peter, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the sort of distinctions between Native American and Indigenous American?
Yeah. Well, I always start by saying, of course, Native American is completely wrong. We are the original people, and as I said, we refer to ourselves as Onundawaka. And also in our language, we say Ongwe Ongwe, meaning a real human being or original human being. And so we know that people aren't going to use those terms. So we have to accept Native American, which is kind of a legalistic term. we have the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C., and or the Museum of the American Indian, and there are federal laws that use that term, Native American. So I do get asked, which do you prefer? And, so I try to answer that question by, well, you can use any of them. I'm not going to attack you for the terminologies you use. Generally speaking, historians have a tendency to define indigenous people as the people who were on the land when settler communities arrived. And those indigenous people then had to deal with the settler, if you will, mentality or intent, which maybe, how to gain more of their land and this interaction that is going to take place. So from that time period, when we have contact with those first people who came, then they say, these are the indigenous people. And so it's kind of framed in that context, in the context of the settler. But, I worked in New York City and I ran the gallery of the American Indian Community House. And occasionally an East Indian called up and said, I'm Indian. Wrong Indian, I would say. We were talking about the original people of this continent, and that's who we're, showing the art from or of. And so a long-winded answer, but again, it's this kind of, if you will, definition that is sort of rooted in both history and anthropology, indigenous.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. I think it's really important that we just lay out, these distinctions so people understand the politics and the power behind naming, right? And I think we could probably all agree that it's ultimately the choice of, the person who you're engaging with, and it's probably best practice to just ask, right? So rather than kind of assert labels for folks. So thank you all for clarifying those things. So I'm going to direct a question now to Brooke. So as a former HWS student and an art history major at that, you have a lot of folks on the call tonight who are also HWS students who are perhaps thinking about careers in the arts. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more. You've told us a bit about how you came to the position, but maybe the sort of longer trajectory of your career path and your beginnings here at HWS and how they may have pushed you along that path.
Sure. I mean, it definitely all started at Hobart and William Smith. I took my first art history course ever, a 100 survey course, and I liked it. But it wasn't until I took a class that was with former professor at Hobart, Elena Cialetti, and she taught a class on the Venetian Renaissance. And it was just the most inspiring course I had ever taken. And I think from that first few days being in class with her, I decided this was definitely something I wanted to do. This is what I wanted my major to be. And I took, a number of classes with her and other professors at Hobart. And I mean, that just really kind of paved the way. And I also actually ended up doing a study abroad with Elena with NYU's Gallatin School, and then went on to get a master's where we met at the University of Buffalo. And I kind of moved from traditional or from, Italian Renaissance and kept kind of moving closer to contemporary art as my education went on. I focused on Weimar German art from the 1920s in graduate school. And then when I left graduate school, I really wanted to delve into the contemporary art world and see what was going on in Buffalo, local galleries like Hallwalls, and then moved to Philadelphia for a little while to see what was going on there through an internship. So, I mean, Hobart was a fantastic place that really inspired this whole career. And I mean, my advice to any art history students out there is don't let anyone discourage you. I know everyone said, what are you going to do with an art history degree? I think my parents were the only two people that actually said, like, no, you should really, if that's what you like, you should go for it. So thankfully, so you actually can have a career that pays you something in this field. So if you love art history, just go with it. And I think even people who are pursuing creative careers in whether it's graphic design or interior design, I think an art history degree really gives you kind of more of a sophisticated visual language, than if you hadn't taken that sort of path. So I think that art history can, pursuing that can really help you in other fields as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I tend to tell students who are in studio is that art history provides you with the tools to situate yourself, right, in the history of art. And that's a really important thing to be able to do, right, to articulate how your practice is in relationship or conversation with artists that have come before you, right? It's really important to do your homework if you're going to, you know, sort of claim the status of artist and understand, you know, where you are in relationship to history. So thanks. So I have another question for all three of you. And so as you've each expressed in one way or another, K-art is unique because of the fact that there are so few contemporary spaces that are dedicated to Native American art practice. So I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about your understanding of why that is, right? So sort of expand a bit for us on why there is such a dearth, such a lack of presence and visibility for Native American art generally, but I think contemporary art perhaps particularly, either in art history or in museums and galleries, however you sort of see it perhaps most glaringly absent.
Well, I'm going to give a little bit of my history just to kind of answer your question. So about 1978, I moved back to New York City. I had lived there right at the end of the 60s. And I was running the American Indian Community House Gallery, an art gallery dedicated to showing Native American art. And we were kind of in an off the beaten path location in the 38th Street and 5th Avenue. There were lots of, you know, department stores in the area, but very little art in the area. And the lease came up for the building that we were in, and consequently, the community house relocated itself to Broadway and 13th Street. But there was really no available space for a gallery within that particular area they were renting. And so I went looking in Soho. And Soho then was really, you know, the place for contemporary art, and found a place right on West Broadway, right on the beaten path, really, right across the road from O.K. Harris, down the road from Leo Castelli. We could go on and on with the names of these places that, you know, showing contemporary art. But of course, they were not, none of them were showing contemporary Native artists. And so we took a second floor space, we renovated it on a shoestring, and I began all the jobs of uncrating, hanging, writing the press release, you know, hanging up the art, answering questions from the public, and planning the next exhibit, and doing all that kind of thing. And oddly enough, along the way, there were writers who really picked up on our shows. So we had reviews in places like the New York Times. So there was a publication called The Village Voice. We got great coverage there. The Daily News, New York Magazine. You know, so we really got good coverage for some of our exhibits, and good response. And yet, really, I really did not feel any sense of community with the other galleries in the area, because that really, that kind of feeling was not extended to us. In fact, the gallery across the street from us was kind of anti us and telling people not to go and visit our gallery. And I found this out later. So that in general, you know, of course, what I witnessed was we were not in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art. At that time, we were not in the collections of the Whitney or the Guggenheim, or we were not in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of course. And we were viewed pretty much as decorative artists. That's the kind of work that was considered Native American, was the decorative arts. And of course, our people did create a lot of utilitarian objects, which they decorated because they wanted beauty around them, and they were very creative people, very talented people. And so, you know, I just found this, you know, a real uphill task of trying to break this kind of closure, or, you know, walling out of our entrance into the major museums. And I even asked the questions of people at MoMA, for example, and they always said, well, unless the patrons support the kind of exhibit that you're talking about, we don't have the funding to put, you know, your work on on view or to create an exhibit around this. The one museum that did take a different stance was the Queen's Museum. I did a contemporary Iroquois art show with the Queen's Museum in 1984, and it was a very nice space, and they did a very professional job of that installation. So, you know, but that was my experience, is that there was just really not a space at the table for contemporary Native art at that time. We were really in a more marginalized situation. And it's ironic to me because it's the original art of the country, you know. And Brooke's experience of going to Italy, I also had. I went to the University of Siena. I lived in the city of Siena. And what impressed me about Italy was they valued their art from back at the time of the Etruscans all the way up to the contemporary artists, and made room for art in their lives. And in America, that wasn't quite the case. You know, there were a very select few people who collected art, and they certainly didn't collect the broad you know, range of art. They focus on one particular style or one particular artist, and that's what they collect. So I'll leave it there for me for now.
Yeah, I mean, I just to build on what Peter's saying. I mean, in my mind, the real challenge is sort of a mindset challenge, right? So I think when people think of Native art, you know, they tend to view it through a sort of a historical lens, right? Sort of crafts and that type of work, which is great. You know, to Peter's point, that type of work should definitely be valued, but and it's terrific art on its own. But I think the challenge is when people think of Native art, they don't sort of see it forward, right? Or see it in the present. And there are amazing contemporary Native artists like Peter, and, you know, and there's a great sampling in our show that people just aren't aware of because I don't think they have that mindset that it really exists, right? And then that feeds into what I think Peter's also saying, is there are significant gatekeepers in the sort of the art marketplace and community, right? There are the, you know, the sort of name museums, name galleries, the name patrons, as Peter's talking about, sort of, you know, those are the gatekeepers that really decide, if you will, you know, they set the table in the sense of the art, right? And this isn't in their mind. I think you see a lot of that changing over in sort of underrepresented groups over the past 10, 15 years, 20. And you see a lot of sort of those underrepresented groups, the contemporary artists really starting to get more exposure, right? And I hope that continues for a lot of the Native contemporary artists because, you know, the work's amazing.
I think we're finally just starting to see it with some of the major museums and nonprofit institutions like the Eiteljorg, the Walker Center, the Heard Museum in the Southwest. These nonprofit museums are mounting these really fantastic shows of contemporary artists. They're starting to buy work by these contemporary Native artists and including them in their collections. And then I think, you know, now that that's being established more, and, you know, Peter's just been included in the Whitney collection. Now it will start, you know, trickling into the commercial space, and you see artists being represented by some of those major blue chip galleries in the bigger cities, New York and Miami and Los Angeles. But there was never, you know, as Dave pointed out, there's never been any concentration, which is where, you know, where this K art fits in. So I feel like the contemporary Native art is finally moving in that direction, but it'll just take time for it, you know, finally to start, you know, entering into that commercial space, and hopefully it will get the recognition it deserves.
You know, something that Peter and Dave were describing, this idea that folks have, that it's the perception, right, of Native American arts looking a particular way or having a utilitarian function being inherently linked somehow to craft. It made me think of James Luna's artifact piece, which is a work that I often teach, right, where the artist presents themselves as an artifact to make precisely this point, right, to sort of to confront the viewer with the perception of Native American culture and cultural practices as, you know, in the past, right? It's sort of always the kind of work that you see perhaps in a history museum or an anthropological museum, but somehow there isn't that space, right, in art spaces of contemporary and modern art production. So if anyone doesn't know who that is, May he rest in peace. Look up James Luna's work. So I have a related question though, to sort of follow up on some, I think this is really important where this conversation is going. And so I want to follow up with a question about how do we define then Native American art, right? So if part of the problem is that there is a misconception about what it is, maybe you all can share with us your definition of what that means. And I'm thinking particularly about one of the important major shows that have come out recently is called Art for New Understanding, Native Voices 1950s to Now. And in that catalog, which I highly recommend folks looking up for that show, there's an essay that's titled after an often quoted phrase, which is, I'm an artist who happens to be Indian, right? So the question of which comes first, right? One's Native American identity or their artistic identity, or do we not have to see it in that kind of order? So that's a sort of big loaded question, but to put it simply, how do we define Native American art, or how do each of you sort of do that work?
Dave, why don't you address this one first, and then we'll, because I
Me?
like what you said the other day when we.
Oh, okay. I think, my definition and is a sort of building on what you just described, right? It's not for me the type of art, if you will, right? It doesn't have to have turquoise or silver or whatever, or be a certain depiction to be native art. For me, it turns on the artist, right? If the artist is native, then the work that artist produces is native art, in my opinion. And but there's more to it. I mean, that's a super simple definition, right? But I think sort of when you really drill down into that and understand what that means, all that art is coming from a somewhat sort of common perspective, right? I mean, there's 574 at least federally recognized Native nations in the US, and there's a great diversity amongst them, right? The Southwest nations are much different in many ways than the Northeast nations, right? But there is a common thread. There is a sort of pan-Indianness to all this, to all that work. And I think when you look at it and when you compare and you contrast work by Native artists, there again, there's a common thread, and there's sort of commonality in terms of the messaging and the experience that art represents. So, I think it's so there's multi-layered.
And I think that, I mean, artists like Jeffrey Gibson, he talks about this often and at length, and I think you maybe even mentioned it in the interview we did with him that's on K-Art's website. But he talks about being categorized as a Native artist in the beginning of his career and not entirely being comfortable with that, but then kind of, accepting that the Native iconography and symbolism is such a huge part of, and that visual language, informs so much of his work that he's kind of settled into the idea that, that he is a Native artist, and that categorization is something that he's going to be fine with. And it's just so embedded in his work, along with so many contemporary and popular culture and modern, ideas and influences.
I'll go again to my personal experience. I had a good friend who was an African-American artist. And when I was just beginning my art career in New York City, he warned me against identifying myself as a Native American, because he said, you're going to really, essentially, you're going to pigeonhole yourself. You're going to limit, your ability to, say, progress or move forward as an artist. And this will be a problem. This will work against you, basically, by you identifying yourself as Native American. And I determined that I would identify myself as Native American, because the other artists that I encountered who were Native American, I related to them. I had a stronger relationship to them, I felt, and more in common with them than other artists that I knew. And I have many friends who are artists from many different cultural backgrounds, but I really did identify with other Native artists. And, I did encounter what he basically said was that kind of discrimination that existed in the art world, and in which, basically a lot of white males get much more recognition than female white artists, and that is more than African American, more than Native American or Hispanic or whatever you want to say. That is changing. Dave is correct. The world is changing and it's becoming a little more accepting. But it's been a good old boys, kind of world, really. And so that's one of those things that I've had to fight. And then I found myself in the role of becoming a curator and becoming a person who organized exhibits and a person who contributed to making an art center come to life and running an art gallery and all of that. So I really became very active in the whole defining of what is Native art and who I chose to show and why I chose to show their work. But I never really got into the kind of writing where a sort of a didactic type of writing where I'm going to analyze the work of each and every artist that I show. I simply wanted to present the work so that the public has an opportunity to learn about us and to see the diversity and also see what I consider to be the quality of the work that is being produced. I've been in some great shows, all Native artists, all Indigenous artists from other parts of the world too. Great work.
Thank you all. And so kind of related then to what Peter's describing, I wonder if you can tell us a bit about the current exhibition that's at K Art Gallery, More Than a Trace. So maybe you can give us a sense, particularly for folks who haven't had the opportunity yet to check out your website, which I believe Teresa just put the link in the chat. So I really encourage everyone to check it out. But maybe you can tell us a bit about that exhibition and what's up next, what we can expect from the space moving forward.
For the first show, I mean, the goal was to kind of do what Peter was talking about, is introduce people to this fantastic work that's out there. I wanted to choose regional artists because we have these amazing contemporary artists right in our own backyard: Peter Jemison, Jay Carrier, Peter B. Jones. And then we wanted to, look farther afield. We have artists from as far as Vancouver, San Francisco, Atlanta, Georgia. And I think Teresa's pulling up the PowerPoint now, so you can actually see some of these artworks. So it's generally a survey. There are all different media. There are all different issues being dealt with. There are some of the work is more political, social, abstract. So, we're really covering a wide variety of art and styles, and also Native backgrounds. As Dave said, there was 547 different recognized nations. So we wanted to make sure we have artists that are coming from all different ancestral backgrounds as well, just to give the public, for people who may not be familiar with contemporary Native art, and as we talked about it, it hasn't really been out there. So this is kind of giving everyone an introduction to kind of the fantastic work. And I love the idea of being able to show how our regional artists can hold up with these internationally known artists like Jeffrey Gibson and Marie Watt and Peter Jemison, who's, I think, both an internationally known artist and a regional artist. So we kind of wanted to include a little bit of everything in this first show.
So maybe Dave, do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming up after? I mean, I believe there are 4 exhibitions per year is the plan for K Art.
Yeah, I hate to punt, but actually Brooke would be much better speaker to that.
So this year, because of COVID and our whole schedule, we're actually doing 3 shows this year. We'll open our next show towards the end of April, and then our 3rd show in September. COVID kind of threw off our exhibition schedule. But for our next show, we wanted to delve into kind of more weightier political issues. So Luzine Hill, who actually has a piece in this current exhibition called Pilgrimage Ribbon, it's a really beautiful piece. She's actually creating a site-specific work for us for the next show. And it's this work that's kind of informing the whole curatorial thesis. She deals with ideas of trauma, particularly to Native women. And the next piece actually abstractly represents the number of women sexually assaulted.
Oh,
and another artist, Julia Rose Sutherland, who I kind of tapped after talking to Luzine. She did this really amazing performance piece in Buffalo at Silo City that recognized the number of murdered Indigenous women, and her performance piece recognized these women who would have gone unknown and unrecognized and untalked about. So these two artists are going to inform the show, and then I'm currently, so it's still a work in progress, is talking to two other women artists who are dealing with similar issues. But we thought this was a really important issue to kind of bring to light, and that, you know, we have the space now and we have this kind of platform, and you know, why not bring these issues up and show how the artists are dealing with them.
So maybe I'll just ask one more question and then I'll open up. I see that there are questions coming through the chat, so I don't want to dominate you know, everyone's time tonight. But perhaps as a way of kind of closing out my questions for you, you could tell us, tell us a bit more about how folks can visit K Art Gallery under the current circumstances.
Sure. So we tried, you know, COVID has definitely been a challenge, obviously. You know, our opening was virtually, although if you go to our website, we have a great video that captures a lot of our opening. But currently, you know, we love to have people in the gallery. It's by appointment due to COVID, but we've tried to make it as easy as possible. If you go on our website, again, it's thek.art. It's all automated. You can make an appointment online, and you just come at that time, it's pretty much self-guided, but we have materials that help with the narrative. But if you want to make a specific appointment with Brooke to really sort of delve a little further, it has an email address on our website, and you can make that appointment as well.
You also get to see this like gorgeously renovated building in downtown Buffalo, which, I mean, the art, besides the artwork, I mean, that's really exciting. So you get to, you know, double your, you know, money for the time, or whatever you want to say.
Yes.
Thank you all very much. I want to make one more plug for the website, because I believe you have from your opening interviews, like brief clips of each artist in the show describing a bit about their work, and you can see some of their work in the video. So please check out the website, and you can get, if you can't visit Buffalo yourself, you can get a sense of the art that's there through the video on the website. Also, the artists' work is on Artsy.
Correct.
Right? So
Yep.
you can see even more of the artists that are represented in the exhibition there. So just to give some folks more places to see the wonderful art that you are all showcasing. So thank you very much for your time. But you're not going anywhere, but I'm gonna step back and see if, open this up to the very large crowd of folks we have, and invite people to ask questions, unless Teresa wants to read any questions that may have come in.
I saw a question from Letitia. She was asking if this was going to be recorded, and I believe it is being recorded and will be available after this.
Yep, we will send out a recording to anybody who has registered, and that recording will also be on the Hobart and William Smith website once we're all branded and published out. Yep.
Okay.
One of the questions that came in was, when we are post-COVID, what type of programming do you all envision?
Yeah, I'll sort of, go ahead. I was just going to say, you know, post-COVID, we'll definitely have a closing for the exhibition, a live one if COVID allows, but actual live openings for our next exhibitions. And the programming, you know, the hope is to bring people in for a speaker series around these concepts, but I'm sure Brooke has other ideas as well.
I would love to see some performance pieces. There are some artists out there doing incredible performance work, even some local artists. So that's one of the things that I would love to get on our program as soon as COVID is over. So fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Right, and Brooke, the question that just came in piggybacks right off of that. What do you see the role for the gallery and future works of public art in the community? Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, that would be fantastic. The Albright Knox has launched an incredible public art program over the last few years. And I mean, to have Native artists involved in something similar we'd be thrilled to be able to get that off the ground or work with one of our, local institutions to do that.
I saw that Chevy asked a question about the first piece of mine that was shown, which is actually called Keeper of the Western Door. And the thought there was, on the left-hand side, there's an antler comb of the kind that was found on Seneca sites. These are carved from moose antler, and they would fit in the palm of your hand, and they're used for maintaining your hair. And then those figures, or those forms that are in blue in the center, are really the Finger Lakes, beginning with Seneca Lake and then coming to Keuka Lake and also to Canandaigua Lake, part of Aboriginal territory of the Seneca people. And then the farthest right, there's kind of a portion of a wampum belt design called the Hiawatha Wampum Belt. And the wampum belts are made up of white and purple shell. And purple comes from the quahog clam, and the white comes from the lightning whelk. And so I'm showing the westernmost part of that, which was Seneca territory or Onondaga territory. And that's what that image was about there. I think she's working on bringing that up. And I've been using handmade papers and working with handmade paper for a very long time. And I'm always looking for interesting examples of these handmade papers. And so I was kind of incorporating some design elements that I used to use many years ago, but now using this handmade paper as kind of the background to this other imagery that I've placed on here. Thanks for the question.
Peter, do you want to talk about this second piece of artwork that you have?
Yeah, Afternoon Shadows. I manage Ganondagan, and we really have 569 acres of land, a very interesting landscape with wooded areas, some deep wooded areas, some native grasses that we have planted, areas that are bordered by a creek that runs through the property, a Great Brook it's actually called. And so all of these have been sources of my inspiration, and just walking in the woods this time of the year and noticing the shadows that are cast in the afternoon, that led to this particular piece. And I did a number of pieces looking at these shadow patterns on snow. And it really, it just really inspired me. It kind of forms its own abstract pattern, and obviously yet it is coming from our natural world. And so, if we look back at the kinds of work that was done on pottery and painted pottery and other kinds of art forms, you see these kind of linear patterns. And I believe they naturally have their origin in our natural world. And so that's kind of where I was going with this one.
And I don't know if I should say this or not, if it's inappropriate, but people love this work. It actually sold yesterday.
Actually, the reason
Bravo.
And the reason why I chose this work for the show is I was actually first introduced to Peter when I was Peter's work when I was in graduate school, and I wrote a paper on a similar work from the same vein and series. And I remembered his work, and it stuck with me until recently, until this project came up, and I was actually able to meet Peter for the first time and go to his studio. So yeah, those works in the winter snow and abstraction are just beautiful, and they really, really resonate. And we sold one. Yay.
Thank you very much. Sometimes, you produce something and for a long time it sits, and you don't, have the opportunity to present it someplace. And then someone comes along and sees it for the first time and is like knocked out by it, and so I really appreciate that they liked it and that we had this opportunity to show it in Buffalo, and that someone will enjoy it, for the future. That's great to me.
Yeah, it's great.
Good. Another question that came in is, do you think that younger Indigenous artists will continue to bring cultural or family tradition into their work? And the second part is, what are the newer subjects that they are taking on?
That's a really good question. I think sort of the short answer to the first question is yes. There are some amazing young Native artists that are very contemporary focused that I've seen with some really fantastic work. A lot of it, and some of it is sort of has a street vibe to it. What issues will they deal with? I think it's very broad, but I think, the answer is yeah, 100%. I think there's some, I know of, many really young Native artists that are producing fantastic work.
Yeah, we had in our juried art show this summer the work by a man named Hayden Haynes, who's a Cherokee artist who's really been living in Cherokee and Seneca, I should say. His mother's Seneca and his father's Cherokee, but he did a fantastic piece. It's kind of in the tradition of a rattle, yet it's all carved from moose antler. And at the same time, he's making comment on the definition of our art being craft when it's really not craft, because he, in addition to carving this rattle, he carved things that look like macaroni all around the rattle and, painted it too. And so it's kind of a pop art piece, if you will. And it's really a knockout piece. We just really loved it when we saw it. Expanding the definition of what is craft and what is art and crossing those lines.
Great. Let's see. How is K-Art Gallery planning to engage the wider Buffalo U.S. audience that might not know about contemporary Native art? And then the other part of that, which I think is really interesting, is how can you do you imagine including Native artists from around the world?
Those are good questions. So I think the first one, how are we sort of trying to engage beyond our immediate area, is, we've put a lot of time and effort behind trying to get our story out through, and frankly, the easiest or now the most sort of efficient way to do that is through social media, through the websites, through those kind of channels. And we've done that a lot, and we've spent a lot of time doing it. And we've actually got much more traction than I expect. I mean, we've had write-ups from a lot of national magazines so far, so we're excited about that. But the second question, I think, is a trickier one. Will we go beyond sort of beyond North America in terms of Indigenous artists? Maybe, I don't know. We haven't really had that discussion. This has sort of been our first focus, but I don't think it's necessarily ruled out.
I agree.
Yeah.
One of the best exhibits I have ever been a participant in, I was in New Zealand, and there were artists from Native American artists there, First Nations artists from Canada, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, obviously Maori, and other non-Native people included in this exhibit. I'm telling you, it was a knockout exhibit, and a lot of the art that we showed was produced in a span of about 7 days and included in this show. The energy level during that stay and in that interaction we had with one another was just fantastic, and it ranged from the most traditional styles of work all the way to the most contemporary work and painting and drawing and jewelry and pottery, and it was unbelievable. There's a lot out there, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
So,
Good. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just gonna ask another question about and I think this is an important one. The comment is, I love the idea of a commercial gallery. Was there ever a decision between engaging with Native art through a commercial gallery versus something like nonprofit frontline arts organization focused on Native engagement? So I think maybe there are a lot of folks in the mix who aren't completely sure about the distinction between those. So maybe you can explain the difference and then why the commercial gallery was the route that you all went with.
Yeah, so I mean, the reason we chose the commercial route was, there are many fantastic nonprofit museums dedicated to Native art, both, traditional and contemporary, right? So, but what we didn't see out there were commercial galleries that collectors could collect this type of work, right? And what I think create that sort of commercial exposure, which just sort of leads to the gatekeepers being aware of the work, right? So so that's why we did this, and that's why we focused on a commercial uh, aspect rather than a nonprofit. But that being said, we're talking now about, maybe sort of setting up a nonprofit side to this that can sponsor speaker series and things like that. But the core sort of focus on art, I think, we're really devoted to a commercial gallery that allows collectors to come and see the work and collect the work, frankly.
Yeah, the commercial concept allows us to be able to connect people to the artwork, and the artwork, that contemporary Native artwork that's out there is absolutely phenomenal. And these artists deserve to have their work purchased and seen and part of this and part of the active dynamic market. And since there aren't that many on the primary market, the commercial galleries at the moment, it just seemed like the perfect time.
I just want to thank all of you for your time, for the work that you've done. I mean, really, K Art Gallery is a undeniably significant contribution to the art world, to Buffalo. I'm so proud as a Buffalo native to know that it's there, and I'm really excited to get the chance to see the space. I encourage everyone, again, check out the website and take a look at the incredible array of artists that you have there. And we're excited to see what the future holds for K Art Gallery. And thank you again so much for joining us tonight, and for everyone else who is on this call.